Hey everyone, an uncharacteristically short video this time to show you how to convert colors in a palette to grease pencil materials using Python. If you're used to drawing grease pencil strokes in Vertex color mode, you're probably already familiar with palettes. But for those of you who don't know, palettes can be found by clicking the Vertex color mode button to activate the Vertex color mode, and then clicking on the color swatch next to it. At the bottom of this menu, you can access a list of palettes available to you. Palettes in Blender work basically like those in Photoshop. It's a list of colors from which you can choose the color you want to paint with. Like other programs, you can add and remove colors from this list. You can also create your own palettes with whatever colors you like. Working with palettes in Vertex color mode is handy because you can reuse a specific set of colors that you define. But one drawback is that it's difficult to change the colors once you've drawn the stroke. If you work in material mode, you can change the color after the stroke is drawn, but alas, the color picker for grease pencil materials doesn't allow you to access your palette colors. There are cumbersome workarounds, of course, but let's use our Python skills to make things easier. In this video, we'll write a simple Python script that converts a palette of colors into individual materials. Before we start coding, let's make a palette. You can use the default palette if you want to, or build a custom one from scratch, but I'd like to show you an interesting way of creating new palettes from images. First thing you'll need is an image from which to sample your colors. A quick Google search will get you lots of images of palettes to work with, but one popular site to get palettes from is the Low-Spec Palette List, for which I'll include a link in the description. It has a wide variety of palettes available as very small images. For this tutorial, I downloaded the Nopal 12 palette, but you can choose whichever one you like. You can download it in a variety of formats and resolutions. I chose the PNG 8X option. Once it's downloaded, we're ready to start. We'll launch Blender and choose to create a new 2D animation scene. To import the image into Blender, we'll switch to the Rendering tab and under the Image menu, choose Open and navigate to the palette image we just downloaded. Converting this image to a palette is easy. We go under the Image menu again and this time choose Extract Palette. To see the palette, we'll flip back over to the 2D animation view, click on the Vertex color mode button, and click the color swatch next to it. If we open up the list of palettes at the bottom, we can see a new palette which matches the color in the palette image we just imported. Just to keep things tidy, we'll rename the palette to just the base name. Now we're ready to start building our script. As usual, we'll split our view, switch it to a text editor, and then create a new file. Out of convenience, we'll start with the basic code for scripting on grease pencils from the link I'll include in the description. We'll copy the code and paste it into our text editor. For this script, we only need to refer to the grease pencil object at the top level. So first, we'll delete the parts of the code that deal with layers, frames, and the other grease pencil components. We don't even need to deal with the grease pencil data, so we'll change our gpencil variable to refer to the grease pencil object directly and not its data. To begin with, we'll store the name of the palette we want to convert in a variable called palette_name. Then we'll create a new function called createPaletteMaterials, and we'll set up two parameters, one for the grease pencil object and the other for the name of the palette we want to convert. Next, we'll add a call to that function, passing in the selected grease pencil object and the palette name. Inside our new function, we'll start by getting the data from our palette. This turns out to be quite simple. We use the get method on the bpy.data.palettes object, and we pass in the name of the palette we want. This searches the palettes in our scene data and returns a palette with a matching name, if any. To make sure this is working, let's add a print statement and toggle on the console window so we can see the output. Now that we have the palette data, we'll use a while loop to cycle through its colors and create one new material per color. For each color in the palette, we'll set up a name that uses the palette's name as the base name and adds a suffix of an underscore and the current loop number. This is how I chose to format my material names, but you can use whatever you like. Now that we've established a name, we'll create a new material by calling the new method on the bpy.data.materials object and pass in that name as an argument. We'll also define the material as grease pencil data by using the createGpencilData method and pass in our new material object. Lastly, we'll append the material to our grease pencil object's material data so that the selected grease pencil can access the new material. For our new material, we need to decide whether we want the strokes drawn with this material to show the stroke, the fill, or both. You can decide for yourself how you'd like this, but for this example, I'll have it display both by setting the grease pencil material's show stroke and show fill attributes to true. Now we're ready to set the colors on our material. color value we want is stored in the palette's colors attribute, so we can access this by referencing the palette.colors.color attribute for the current color in our loop. The only minor issue here is that material colors expect 4 values, red, green, blue, and an alpha, whereas palette colors we get from the palette object have no notion of an alpha, it's just RGB. So we have to jump through a bit of a hoop here and build a new tuple consisting of each individual channel of the palette's color object, 0 for red, 1 for green, and 2 for blue, and then we'll add an alpha value of 1. With our properly formatted color tuple, we can now assign that to the material's color and fill color attributes. And that's it. If we run the code, we can now see the new materials in our Grease Pencil Objects material list, along with the default stroke materials, which you can get rid of if you want by clicking on the minus symbol. With our new materials, we can now use palette colors, but modify them if we want to and have it reflected in our strokes. The only thing that's a bit clunky about our script is that we have to hard-code the palette's name. To get the currently active palette's name, we query the context.toolsettings and tunnel down to the palette. We then get the value of its name attribute. If we replace our hard-coded name with this bit of code, it will now draw the name from the active palette. If we remove our materials and switch our palette to the default palette and then rerun the script, we now get materials based on the default palette. So all in all, a fairly simple script to make this work. I hope you'll find it useful. Thanks for watching.